Most men think relationship problems start when a woman gets angry, but the real turning point usually happens much earlier. It starts when she becomes emotionally distant. She starts criticizing more, she reacts colder, she pulls away emotionally, and the man begins to wonder, what am I doing wrong? At this moment, most men react in one of two ways. They either try to control the situation harder, they start explaining more, arguing more, pushing for solutions, or they go to the opposite extreme. They step back and stop influencing anything. They tell themselves, I'll just let things be. But here's the part most people completely misunderstand. The real problem is usually not control. And it's not the absence of control either. The real problem is something deeper, the loss of inner center. In healthy relationship dynamics, men and women often hold different stabilizing roles. A man tends to hold structure, direction, and stability. A woman often brings emotional life, connection, and aliveness into the relationship. And when this balance starts to break, criticism and tension often appear. So, in this video, we will look at what is really happening in this dynamic and why this pattern appears in so many relationships. Let's break this case together. Case. Many men describe almost the same relationship story. At the beginning, everything feels natural. The woman is warm, engaged, emotionally open. She is curious about the man. She listens. She laughs. She wants to spend time together. But slowly, something begins to change. The warmth becomes criticism. The curiosity becomes corrections. The emotional openness becomes distance. And at this point, many men come to a very simple conclusion. They think she just changed. But in most cases, that is not what actually happened. What changed is the relationship dynamic, because relationships are not static, they are systems. And when something shifts inside that system, both partners begin to react to the new dynamic. And that reaction is what most people mistake for personality changes, pattern recognition. Before we explain what is happening inside this dynamic, let's recognize a few signals many men notice. These signals often appear in very simple conversations. You might hear phrases like, why do I always have to explain everything? Or, you never really listen. Sometimes it sounds like this, I feel like I have to handle everything myself. And when men hear these phrases, they often think this is just complaining. But in many cases, these sentences are not just complaints, they are signals. Signals that the emotional dynamic inside the relationship has already shifted. And when you understand what that shift actually means, many confusing situations suddenly starts making much more sense. The three positions. To understand this dynamic, it helps to see that most relationships move between three basic positions. The first position is control. This is when one partner tries to manage the system. They push decisions, they correct behavior, they try to shape the relationship through pressure. The second position is adaptation. Here, the other partner starts adjusting constantly. They try to avoid conflict, they try to keep the peace, and little by little, they start losing their own center. But there is a third position, a much more stable one. The position is called centered presence. This is when a person remains grounded in themselves without trying to control the other person and without abandoning themselves either. And this third position is where the healthiest relationship dynamics usually exist. What often happens to men? Now, here's something that happens very often in relationships. When tension appears, many men move toward one of two extremes. Some men start pushing harder. They try to fix the situation. They explain more. They argue more. They try to push the relationship back into harmony. But the more they push, the more the tension grows. Other men go to the opposite extreme. They step back. They stop leading conversations. They stop influencing decisions. They tell themselves, I'll just let things happen. And on the surface, this can look like calmness, but very often, something important disappears here presence. Because stepping back is not the same thing as being centered. And this is where many relationship dynamics start drifting off balance. And here's the part most men completely miss. When a man loses his center, the relationship system does not stay neutral. Someone else starts stabilizing it. Control versus influence. To understand this, we need to see a very important difference the difference between control and influence. Control sounds like this we are doing it this way. It pushes, it pressures, it tries to force agreement. Influence feels very different. Influence is not loud. A man simply has clarity. He knows where he stands. He knows what direction feels right. But he does not force compliance. He stays calm. He stays present. And this creates a very different emotional environment because people naturally resist pressure, but they often respond to clarity. And when influence replaces control, the dynamic inside the relationship starts to change. What happens to women in this dynamic? Now let's look at what often happens on the other side of the system. When a relationship starts feeling unstable, the nervous system automatically looks for stability, and very often the woman moves into that role. But it does not always look like support. Sometimes it shows up as criticism, emotional pressure, or trying to control decisions. From the outside, this can look like a struggle for power, but in many cases, something else is happening. The system is trying to rebalance itself. If the structure feels uncertain, someone tries to create this structure. And this is why criticism very often appears exactly when the relationship starts losing its internal balance. What emotional presence actually means. There is another piece in this dynamic that is equally important. And this is something many men misunderstand. When we say a woman is emotionally present, this does not mean drama, it does not mean chaos, and it does not mean constant emotional reactions. Emotional presence simply means she stays connected to her experience. Instead of controlling, she might say, This does not feel right to me, or I feel sad about this. That is not pressure, that is emotional honesty. And this honesty is actually what keeps the emotional life of a relationship alive. Because when emotions disappear, relationships often become something very different. They become logistics, schedules, responsibilities, but the emotional connection slowly fades. And when that happens, many couples start living together without actually feeling close anymore. Healthy dynamic model. Now, let's look at what a healthy dynamic actually looks like. It starts with a man in his center. He knows his values, he knows his boundaries, he knows his direction, but he does not force or control. He simply influences the relationship through presence and clarity. And here's the important part when a man is centered, women often naturally become emotionally present. Not because he demanded it, not because he argued it or convinced her, but because the system stabilizes itself. Presence creates safety, clarity creates trust, and calm influence creates attraction. Key insight of the case. Here is the insight most men miss. At the moment when you lose your center, your influence disappears. You start adapting too much, avoiding conflict, seeking approval, and the woman often starts taking over the stabilizing role. Criticism, pressure, distance. These are not about you as a person. They are about the shift in the system. When you reclaim your center, you stop reacting from fear or guilt. You stop trying to fix her or the system. Instead, you hold your presence, your clarity, your direction, and the relationship naturally responds. Pattern mirror moment. Now, here's the part that most men feel immediately. Think about your own relationship. Have you ever felt like this? You try everything and nothing works. You step back hoping she'll change. You lose yourself in the process. If this sounds familiar, you are not alone. And this is exactly why understanding the system, not just her behavior, is so powerful. So, if you want to explore this situation step by step and see how to restore presence, respect, and attraction, then check the link in the description. There you can access the full library of case breakdowns, submit your own relationship questions, and start learning practical steps to strengthen your relationships. And remember, it's not about control, it's about presence, clarity, influence, and the centered man. Take that first step, and the rest will follow naturally.